trouble at the ballot box, and the Democratic National Convention. Both are going on, and we're about to talk about both on Political Perch.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Political Perch podcast, a bi-weekly podcast that talks about current events, politics, presidents, history, and anything that is plaguing the United States of America. Join us.
Hello, guys. I'm Ashton,
And I'm Andy.
and welcome to today's Political Perch. We are recording this on the 18th, the night of. So we are currently doing this during the second day. I would say second day doesn't have as big of speakers as the first day, so that's why we're doing this. And we'll kind of watch a recap of the second night and kind of give you guys, well, we'll give you guys a recap of the second, third, and fourth night on our next podcast, but we're going to give some initial reactions. Andy, I know we talked beforehand. You didn't watch the full night. I did. I watched all 2 hours of the first night. You saw a recap. What exactly did you see, and can you give our first initial impressions?
Yes, I know I watched Michelle Obama's speech, which I know we're going to get into in depth in a little bit. I watched the very emotional speech from Kristen. I'm very going to butcher this last name. Your Quizaz. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce that last name. But I saw those two. I know that this was a really good night. I've heard there was a lot of good speakers on top of that too. There was I cannot remember her name to save my life. Some pundit that came on and talked about everything that's going on that did very well at what she did. And honestly, I thought it was a good night. You know, with the whole COVID situation, nobody was expecting craziness. No one was expecting a lot coming from these Democratic or even Republican National Convention. Maybe so they expected more from the DNC since they had a lot more time to prepare for this. But I think it blew everyone's expectations out of the water for what it could be virtually. And overall was a pretty good night one. Ashton, what do you think?
Yes. So let's split this up into two different things. You have the content, and then you have the presentation itself. Let me start talking about the presentation itself. I didn't know what to necessarily expect. You could get anywhere from stiff Skype speeches with just PowerPoints or something a little bit more polished. And what they delivered, I watched the full thing, and I even got oh gosh, my wife even sat down with me, and she was going to watch a few minutes and go off and do her own thing. She sat down and watched the full 2 hours. And trust me, we are not the target demographic for Democrats. It was very well made. It was very polished. I was surprised, as someone who's in the technical background. I do software development for a living. So I know somewhat of what it takes to put on the technical, um, just the amount of technical skill you need to put together a presentation like that, with all the cuts, with all the, live feeds. Some of the videos weren't live, but some were. It was just very impressive how they did that so seamlessly. I thought the host, Eva Longoria, was just perfect. I mean, of course, it wasn't off without a hitch. There are some speakers clearly that weren't told, hey, you need to wait a good 15 seconds when you go live to start speaking, because some people started stepping or like cutting while it was transitioning. So it wasn't perfect, but it was very well done on the technical side of things.
100%. It takes a lot of effort, doing these podcasts, doing the YouTube videos we do. Takes compared to that takes very little editing, very little talent when it comes to that. But that and the 2 hour scale mixed with the live, mixed with the pre-recordings is just amazing that they pull that off. And it's just day one. There's more days to come, so it's impressive nonetheless. But Ashton, let's kind of move into just diving into the day and specific points. What do we
Mm.
think? Let's start with our best speech of the night. Ashton, if you had to summarize and pick one person that gave the best speech, who do you think it was?
Well, there's no debate. It's Michelle Obama. I mean, me and you, I think we can agree on this. Michelle Obama is the one figure in politics right now that could beat any Democrat in a primary in the next 12 years.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Instantly.
Michelle Obama's popularity is just sky high. She is a very well-rounded speaker. She's very eloquent. She poses herself very respectively, and she's tapped into the younger audience with her podcasts that she produces. So she's very well liked.
Yeah, the speech was very well written. I thought it was very pointed, which for Joe Biden's purposes is really good. Um it's hard to lay a finger on her from the Trump campaign perspective, and just overall, I thought it was a just so well executed. She had gravitas, she had charisma. I mean, everything you could want from a speaker, she had it plus more. And she delivered in such an effective way with so many zinger one liners. Like when she said, Donald Trump just isn't fit for this point in time, it is what it is, using his own words against them. That was like cherry on the top of what was already a great speech, and she's delivered, I would argue, some of the best speeches of the last two other conventions in 2016 and 2012. So it's amazing she, uh, so far, has hit a three-peat with just a fantastic speech. Any reaction, Andy, to her speech?
Honestly, I really enjoyed Michelle Obama's speech. Like you said at the beginning, I did not watch the full 2 hours of it. I watched the recap and I watched some specific speeches all the way through that I wanted to see. Michelle Obama's is one that I like to watch because while I did not agree with her husband Barack Obama's politics all the time and his policies all the time, I did respect both him and I very much respected Michelle Obama, what they brought to America, just the elegance, the face of what a president should be, respectful. This is who a president is. I think everyone can agree with that, regardless of your political views. Her speech, like you said, was one of the best. Using his own words against him, perfect. It really shows that if she ever wanted to run for president, she would probably win in a landslide, especially for the Democratic side. We don't know who she would run against, but it could be a landslide because of how well liked she is, how well of a speaker she is, and just her grace on everything. Speech did perfect. It nailed everything on the head that she needed, made it that really saying Trump is bad and we need to get him out of there. And it
Hmm.
was perfect and it worked well.
Yeah, I will definitely comment or piggyback of what you were saying. She's the one Democrat where if it was Mitt Romney renominated, I would vote for her over Mitt Romney. She's the only Democrat in the country that I would consider that. So that should tell people how much really she's just beloved, and she's the closest thing we have to I don't want to say royalty, but she's just respected in such a high manner. So let's move on. I guess we can do surprises of the night. And I would say my biggest surprise of the night was Bernie's speech. I don't know if you saw it, but it was surprisingly tepid in tone but energetic for Biden the person. And I was very much impressed with how much Bernie kind of gave cover to Biden. He gave cover to John Kasich, who was also there. He said a line something like, "It's time to stand with liberals, moderates, and conservatives." He was just very respectable and it didn't feel like he was a dog dragged to the vet like he was in 2016, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes complete sense. In 2016, the way he lost to Hillary, he didn't like Trump. He still doesn't like Trump, obviously, but it was more he was forced to say yes to Hillary because he didn't want Trump. This is different. He might not agree with Joe Biden, but he's a lot more accepting of Joe Biden and these past 4 years of Trump that he wants Biden to win and get Trump out of there. So his enthusiasm looked a lot more genuine than it did 4 years ago. I 100% agree with you.
Mm. And what was your surprise of the first night?
I don't know if this was such a surprise for people that had more knowledge going into like the makeup and agenda of the day, but when George Floyd's brother came out and
Mm.
helped hold that moment of silence for George Floyd, I thought that was just super sweet and awesome that they just paid that moment. Obviously, the Democratic Party was going to pay respect to George Floyd. They should, obviously, but having his brother come out just made that even more special, in my opinion.
Mm. Yeah, that was a very touching moment. There are a lot of moments during this convention that were touching when they had the kids singing national just the national anthem, and it was just my wife was constantly crying in different parts of it. And uh like I said, we both for a long time been conservatives, so watching a Democratic convention was weird already, and the fact that they did it in just such a well done fashion, mixed with good emotion, good videos, touching. It was a lot about touching the humanity of all of us. And I thought they did it so well, so hard for Republicans to attack. You know, Donald Trump and his campaign manager wanted a convention all about single payer healthcare. They're expecting Antifa to have a 4 minute tribute, and riots, or them to praise riots. That didn't happen, and like I said, it was very surprising, very very surprising. Um, Andy, you ready to talk about the RNC? Move on to our second
Uh,
second
One
topic.
more thing I will bring up just about the DNC first. I think, well, two things. First, I agree with you. Emotions are such a huge part in getting any voter to switch or vote your way. If you can tap into the emotions of the voter, it's very hard to get them away from that. Emotions play so much of a part of our lives and everything we do. Even if you don't realize it, emotions are so important. And what they did was just bringing victims of they lost their parents for COVID because of the Trump's response. And how, they say, "Hey, we don't blame Trump for the virus. We blame him for the response." That's such a powerful thing because I think a lot of people on the right want to say, "Oh, they're blaming Trump for everything. They're blaming him for the virus." No, no. They're not blaming him for the virus. They're blaming him for the response, and that's a huge part and a point to come across for that. And secondly, I really love John Kasich. I loved him in 2016. I thought, he wasn't my first choice, but he was always second or third for me. I love him. He's a very respectable man, and that showed yesterday when he came out
Mhm.
and he said, "This is weird for me." He's like, "I've been a Republican my whole life. It's weird," but he just is so much more about country over party that he's okay with supporting Biden over Trump if it means we don't get 4 more years of Donald Trump. And that I just wanted to get that out there and say my last remarks about that. But Ashton, we can move on to the RNC, which is going to be a lot different.
Yes. Let's move on to the RNC. So so far, the RNC, let's say, is last secondly being thrown together. They haven't announced a speakers list, which is a little weird. Typically, you do it 2 or 3 weeks beforehand, and it's the week before, and they haven't said at all. There's been a few leaks, and so far we know Trump is speaking, Pence is speaking, the First Lady, all of his kids. Um, They also confirmed the Covington kids, or kid. I think it's the one kid. The gun-toting Missouri couple, the ones that were pointing guns
Of
at
course.
the protesters. And no one else so far confirmed, but I think we can safely assume You'll probably get Pompeo, a few senators, um, probably maybe Ted Cruz, probably some senators running for re-election, Lindsey Graham, I assume. So, Andy, do you have any reaction to that colorful lineup? I assume the My Pillow guy is also on the list.
Okay. So, to me, you look at just the list that they have, look at the list that DNC has, and you tell me if you're like me, an independent voter, always in the fence because, there is no independent candidate running for president. That's just not how the government is really set up at this point. And you're trying to decide who you want to vote for. And you look at and you watch the DNC and the RNC, which group of people are going to get you to come out and vote for their group? A My Pillow representative, or Mike Pence, or Michelle Obama and John Kasich and Andrew Cuomo, and touching stories. I just think that the RNC is just so slapped together the last second because for so long they were intent on doing a live convention, but they're not doing that anymore. They had to switch to virtual. That's not going to be a strength for them. I think that's going to be hurting them when it comes time for it. And then you bring
It,
people in like the gun-toting Missourians that are very decisive. I mean, divisive. Sorry, divisive for the country. It's like it's not as inclusive and all togetherness as other people are for the Democratic Party. It's more only for the conservatives.
and that's very much assuming that it goes off without a technical hitch. And people misunderstand or think about how much, if it's a technical mess, people won't even watch it at all. You need a not flawless, but near the perfect technical presentation in order for people to even watch your message at all. And that's why it's important Democrats did it so well. And, we're not saying that the Republicans are going to be bad. But for example, Andy, you're in college. It's kind of like, let's say you have a paper due at the end of your semester. There's a difference between if you start writing it 4 months out and a week. Of course, there's no guarantee if you start writing it 4 months out, you'll get an A. But you're pretty sure you have a better chance of getting an A if you write it 4 months out than a week out. And that's basically what happened with these conventions. The Democrats had a greater, more likely or better chance of having a good technical convention. That way, all they have to do is worry about the content, and now Republicans have to worry about both. And if the technical message isn't there, content's not going to get out. Let alone if the content's good, that's its own issue. And I think the Republicans going to have trouble finding good content in a diverse enough content. Like diversity isn't everything, but it allows different groups to hear your message. The
Yeah,
Democrats are putting out so much diversity of messages on so many topics. I feel like the Republicans are going to just hit one note wonders from 2016.
yeah. Just to harp on that point a little bit, the difference between the Republicans don't have the technological infrastructure for this. There's never been a convention like this in history. And to wait until basically the last minute to create a whole new virtual landscape for this is not a recipe for success. Like you said with the paper, that does not mean it won't be good. You never know who they have working on it and how good it might be, but you have a better chance of success 4 months out than you do a week or 2 weeks out. That's all we're saying. So we'll see how it comes.
Hmm. Yeah, with the actual people speaking, if I have to guess, the best speech given, uh, from the Republicans, I guess it would be Nikki Haley if she speaks. And I feel like that will be Nikki Haley's moment to set up her run in 2024.
I
Uh,
agree.
she is the most natural gifted speaker the Republicans have right now. She is coming from South Carolina for a lot of my life, paying attention to South Carolina politics. For people who aren't from South Carolina, I'll tell you now, she is the smartest, one of the smartest political people that to ever come out of that state. There's a reason why she was basically never Trump in the entire 2016 election, ended up getting a job in the Trump White House, and when she left, she didn't get trashed by the president. There's a reason that happened. She is incredibly politically smart, regardless if you agree with her politics or not. And I feel like a lot of people are or people are not understanding, but kind of just overlooking her when she shouldn't be overlooked. And she comes from the third in the country primary. So, that's who I would think will probably end up giving the best speech.
I agree with you. If Nikki Haley does, show up for the convention, she will definitely give an amazing speech, probably the best. But let's just put that on the hypothetical, probably might not happen or may happen, but not confirmed list. And one that I know for sure will be there, and I know for sure will always give a good speech, regardless if you like him. And in this case, we do not like him. That is the president, Donald Trump. He is a gifted speaker, even if you don't like it. He won the 2016 election because of those speeches, using big words that get people's responses. Build a wall, make America great again. Short and concise quotes that get his message across and get his name out there. That's what he does. He likes controversial topics. That gets him exposure. He will do good no matter what, and his speech will be good. And that's why I pick him.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to do a kind of hypothetical question here, and this has nothing to do with the convention, but what you said with
I
Nikki Haley.
I
Hold on, Ashton, hold on. This got my mind turning. Let's say 4 years from now, Joe Biden is not medically clear. Let's say Joe Biden wins, or if Donald Trump wins, regardless, let's say Trump wins, of course, he can't run again. But if Biden wins, he's medically can't run for another term, right? So we have to have two new presidents in 2024.
two nominees.
Two nominees for president. So, if you had Michelle Obama versus Nikki Haley, how good of an election would that be in your eyes?
Nikki Haley would lose in a landslide, and
I'm
I
just
think
saying.
um, Michelle Obama would get even higher African American turnout than Obama or
I'm
her
not saying
husband.
it's going to be close. I just think that would be an amazing campaign to watch, honestly.
No, I fully expect 2022 or not two, but 24 to be Kamala Harris versus Nikki Haley, and that will be somewhat close.
Yeah, I probably would vote for Haley, but you don't know. We'll all see how things turn out. We
I
don't know
thought you
how.
were going to say the best RNC speech was going to be Melania Trump. Oh, sorry, I meant Michelle Obama's speech, basically, done by Melania Trump, like she did 4 years ago.
They are known from that, Ashton. But let's move on, from the convention talk to just some controversy going on in America right now, and that is with just the post office. Obviously, we know about USPS's financial concerns. We know about how the Postmaster General has agreed to testify to the House, which broke its vacation earlier on Friday, about concerns on what's happening within the United States Postal Service. A lot of stuff going on. We have, complaints about people taking away ballot boxes. Those are going back in. A lot of
Postal
criticism.
boxes, too.
You know how Donald Trump has hate mail-in voting, thinks it's a fraud, even though there has not been any evidence for that. Donald Trump has basically declared a war on the Postal Service. A lot of stuff is going on with that. Ashton, can you give us just your reaction to this and your insight?
Hmm. Okay, so basically, a lot of the stuff going on within the post office, a lot of it was kind of like being hidden almost. It was starting to leak out that they were cutting the budget, that they were removing all happened to be 90 days before the election, slashing budgets, taking away collection boxes, all were right when some states are starting to think about transitioning to mail in voting. Now, let's go over to that mail-in voting versus absentee. Because if you haven't seen, Andy, you've seen the president praising absentee voting in Florida, but attacking mail-in voting. For everyone listening to this podcast, it does depend on state by state, but for the most part, absentee voting and mail in voting are the exact same thing. Most people who absentee vote mail it in. Therefore, it is a mail in vote. And this is a very weird thing for the president to be attacking, mainly because most campaigns, one in a lot of Republican states, are done by mail-in voting because Andy, who tends to vote by mail?
The majority of people that vote by mail are elderly citizens, which are usually conservatives.
Yes, and that is his base. So it makes no sense to me. A lot of Florida operatives in the Republican Party have been freaking out about this, and that's why you saw Trump tweet a few days ago, "Hey, it's okay to vote by mail or sorry, vote absentee in Florida." It's just this weird dichotomy of him insulting vote by mail and getting Republicans to distrust it, but yet act like absentees any different. So my reaction is it's not surprising that a Trump appointee in the USPS is, you know, starting to try to dismantle it right in front of our eyes 90 days before election. Now, they did come out today and say that they were stopping to do that and that they didn't mean to and they don't want to look like they're doing anything political. So I appreciate them stopping the not look political, even though it was clearly political, and that it had to take Congress breaking from their vacation, coming back and calling him up on Friday for him to stop it. And it's clear, and the Trump appointees have done this before, where they stop doing something after they get caught, and when they get called up, they're like, "Oh, we stopped it. Hey, we're not doing anything wrong. We stopped it." Well, you stopped it after you got caught and after
Yeah,
people started complaining.
yeah. I've seen, like, if you look at what Bernie Sanders said, that he thinks this is voter suppression or very close to voter suppression. Now, I think it's very borderline. If they would have kept going, that they're trying to quote unquote steal an election by altering mail-in voting, even though, like you said, it's the same thing as absentee voting. But I don't know, like you said, how it helps them, because if you're telling people that voting by mail is wrong and is fraud and all these things can happen because of you voting by mail, your elderly population is less likely to go out and vote. If they can't vote by mail, they're not going to vote. That's less votes for the Republican Party. I don't see how it helps. Usually, the younger population is more Democratic, left leaning, and they're more likely to go vote because younger people are usually at a lower risk to the COVID virus. So I don't know how it helps him. I don't know why he needs to attack the post office. It was the post office wasn't doing good before. It's been losing a budget almost every year. So it's just a tough time for the post office, and
Well,
I've seen a lot of campaigns to save it.
it's literally one of the few institutions in America that has a positive rating by the public. So, it's weird that he would attack it. But I mean, on the politics side of it, that's one of the reasons, Andy, when you asked me during our last map, oh, why is Florida a little bit darker blue for you than, a lot of pundits would have it? And I say that because of this mail-in voting issue. He is tacking something where literally it's the only reason why a lot of Republicans win statewide in Florida. And I actually expect Trump to lose not only the election day vote, but the big mail in vote, which I think will be around 55% of the votes casted. This election will be mail in, maybe 45 to 55, somewhere between there. But around half of the votes will be mail in. And I think Biden's going to win both. And a lot of pundits are expecting Biden to only win the mail in and not the election day, and I just don't see that happening because I was watching CNN. They're like, oh well, you're going to get a big surge at the start of Trump voters coming in, and it'll look like Trump's leading, and he'll try to claim victory, and the election will go on for days and stuff like that. I don't necessarily see it could go that way, but I don't see it going that way. I see Biden actually building up big leads and the mail-in votes just solidifying those leads in a lot of swing states. Any comments on the politics of it, Andy?
I will share kind of a anecdote kind of thing just to harp the point we're making. You know my grandfather Ashton, great man. He recently has come home from getting his hip replaced, battling just that, and sepsis has kept him in and out of rehab in the hospital, but he finally came home last week. We're very glad to get him home, get him back to normal. But for the first time, it seems this year in his life, he's going to have to vote by mail. Now, he is a lifelong Republican. He will most likely, I don't know his thoughts on this election 100%, but most likely will vote Republican again. If he can't vote by mail because, Trump is telling him that it's fraud, he could lose that vote. And that's not unique. My case is not unique. This could hurt him across the board. We've been saying it. We don't understand why it's happening. Politically, it doesn't really make sense for this to happen. I agree with you that, I obviously we think Biden's going to win the in-person vote, but he's very well could win the mail-in vote because they're like the Democratic voters are less likely to feel like it's fraud, which increased voter turnout there.
I think on a CNBC poll, or yeah, it was a CNBC poll, I believe. Uh, Republicans only had a 30% trust in mail-in vote, and Democrats had something like a 80%, and that's that should scare a lot of political pundits because if the virus even has somewhat of a image of a uptick, I think 50 to 55% of Republicans are worried about the virus. So you could see like a dip in the Republican percentage of the voter base when it comes to November 3rd, and no one's expecting it. And when it happens, it could be something similar to what happened to Hillary Clinton, but on the Republican side, where she gets less vote or less percentage of certain groups coming out for her, and it happens to Trump on this side, and that that could cause a bunch of states no one sees in play to be in play. And that's how you could see a scenario play out if, Trump continues down this road of being very blunt with his attacks and not being, this is the problem with having a nominee like Trump that beats stuff over the head with a mallet instead of being precise with the dagger, cutting to certain things that are positive for Democrats and negative for Republicans. Instead, he's just beating the something to death that doesn't really help him.
I think you look at everything that's going on. I think it shows how desperate Donald Trump is, and I think he knows he's losing right now, and he's trying everything he can to keep voters from voting. Right? You look at the 2016 approach that he gave versus the 2020 approach. 2016, he had to win over voters that were not Republican. There's always a saying that Democrats win when turnout is high, and that is very true. And it's happening. In 2016, he won the voters that were usually Clinton, so would have been Clinton supporters. 2020 is different. He's not trying to win those voters over, and if he is, he's doing a bad job out of it. He's trying, for some reason, desperately to keep increasing his popularity within his own conservative group. It doesn't make sense to me. Limiting mail-in voting is going to hurt him. There's a lot more things he's doing that's hurting him and trying to increase his standing with the right wing, which he's already got has won over easily, obviously. So his politics and his approach to the 2020 campaign just doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, a lot of conservatives like to cite the enthusiasm gap, and I always reply to arguments like that with you don't get 2 votes for a happy voter. You get 1. You get the same amount as a unhappy, just I'll vote for Biden because he's not Trump voter. That's how Trump won. He didn't win last time because all his supporters were more happy than Hillary's. He won because in a few swing states, some voters that didn't like either chose to go with him over her.
Yes,
That's
and
how he won.
we're seeing this play out exactly like 2016, but in reverse roles.
Hillary Clinton just happened to lose a few states because her voters weren't as in like I would say happy to vote for her. Michigan would come to mind is one of the few states she should have won even with Trump winning that she ended up losing just because of bad turnout. Biden doesn't have that issue, and he won't have that issue. And I feel like picking Harris has even surprised me to the point of how much enthusiasm she has kind of ginned up for the ticket compared to what I expected. I don't think it's going to be kind of like Palin esque of like boosting the ticket to leading for a few weeks, but I do think she will provide a little cushion in a few states that he wouldn't have had if he picked a more boring candidate.
Yeah, but we will see how this turns out in the coming weeks, obviously. Thank you guys, though, for joining us today on the 4th episode of season 1 of Political Perch podcast. We'll be back again in 2 weeks, as this is a bi-weekly show. We will dive into the end of the Democratic Convention and the start of the Republican Convention, talk about that and some other things that will happen in the news coming up. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to see more of this, keep look at our other 3 episodes. They're all on YouTube right now on our YouTube channel, The Mr. R Show. Please subscribe to that. Stay safe, wear your guys' mask, and we'll see you in the next podcast.